It's a pleasure to introduce Gregory Hinton, author, filmmaker, and independent curator. Gregory was born on the Fort Peck Reservation in Wolf Point, Montana, raised in Cody, Denver, and after graduating from the University of Colorado at Boulder, he moved to California to pursue a writing and film career. He has published 4 novels: Cathedral City, Desperate Hearts, The Way Things Ought to Be, and Santa Monica Canyon. And you have a current manuscript that's out, Night Rodeo, which is...
It's upstairs on the shelves.
That's okay. But anyway, and that one covers the 1950s.
Yeah, it's set against the backdrop of the 1959 Cody Stampede.
So we're looking forward to seeing that in print.
I certainly hope so.
All right. He is the creator and producer of Out West at the Autry, which he first developed with the Autry Center in Los Angeles in 2009, which is a historic program, series of lectures, films, plays, and gallery exhibitions designed to illuminate the contributions of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community to the history and culture of the American West. And your research here is a continuation of that. He is producing Out West programming in California, Nevada, Montana, Illinois, and Indiana, in addition to here. His first play, Beyond Brokeback, premiered at the Autry Center in December 2010 in commemoration of the 5th anniversary of Brokeback Mountain. So please join me in welcoming Gregory Hinton.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all for being here today. It's you honor the subject of my research by your presence, and I want to thank Jeremy Johnston, of course, and Mary Robinson, John Rum, Lynn Stalling, and the entire staff of the BBHC for making this possible. It's been my privilege to read the Buffalo Bill papers, and I want to thank also Baron Collier, Bruce Eldridge, and Wally Johnson, and to Al Simpson and Ann, and to Pete Simpson, and to Ernie Goppert, my love and very best. Several years ago, it was my great privilege to speak here at the 50th anniversary of the Whitney Gallery of Western Art. I called my talk "Waiting for a Chinook, Searching for My Father, a Wyoming Country Editor." My dad was Kip Hinton, and he was a prize-winning photojournalist and editor of the Cody Enterprise from 1956 to 1962. As a kid, I attended the groundbreaking of the Whitney Gallery of Western Art. I lived in the small stucco house up at Canyon and 11th, across the street from the Coe Mansion, and I also watched that being built. My older brother and sister and I would cross the street when the construction workers left, and we'd run up that spiral staircase till my mom yelled at us, and it completely filled my bedroom window as a boy. So that I looked out, and there was the house, and I thought it was beautiful, but I really loved my house too. And I'm happy to see just how beautifully it's being restored. And people ask me, has Cody changed? And my frank answer is no, and I mean that as a great compliment. I have loved being back here. The photograph behind me was taken by my dad at the 1960 Cody 4th of July Stampede. And it was pictured that year among Look Magazine's 10 best sports photos of the year. And when Jack Richard found out about it, he told my dad he'd been shooting the bull so long it just came naturally. So the summer I spoke, I had located it was lost. All of my dad's work was lost in the fire of 1974 at the Enterprise. And this image and negative were lost, and I happened to find it at the National Archives in the Look magazine, archives. And I found it about 2 weeks before I came, and I had it reproduced, and now it belongs to the Buffalo Bill Historical Center, and I wish you'd make a greeting card out of it. When I came 2 years ago to honor my dad's legacy, but I didn't tell you the whole story of what his legacy actually was. You see, I'm a gay man, and so is my wonderful brother, who I lost 9 years ago. Even with my dad's unconditional support, we, like many men and women born in the rural American West, evacuated our community looking for companionship, community, and safety in the big city. and doing so meant leaving our family and our hometowns behind. So you see, without intending it to, my dad's photo, for me, is a metaphor for what it feels like for some of us to be gay kids in rural Western America. You're looking up and wondering when the bull is going to strike. Now, lots of people leave small town America for the big city, but safety isn't their primary reason for doing so. And so happily, part of living here is changing ever so much, ever so slowly. And this is why I'm here today, and this is my mission for Out West. I'd like to show you a 3-minute video to better explain what I hope to accomplish.
Are there any other motions this morning? Representative Sands.
Madam Speaker Pro Tem and esteemed colleagues, before 1997, under the Montana law, any act of love between people of the same sex was a felony, punishable by one of the stiffest sentences in the United States, 10 years in prison. Senate Bill 276 proposes to repeal 13 words in the definition of deviant sexual conduct. Deviant sexual relations means, and this is the language to be removed, sexual contact or sexual intercourse between two persons of the same sex, and it leaves any form of sexual intercourse with an animal. As a member of the gay lesbian community, I cannot tell you how appalling and insulting it is to have my right to love someone included in a sentence that's about having sex with animals.
What laws are it that we ultimately wish to change? Now, I know it's not vogue to quote scripture on the House floor, so I won't do so. But I will refer you to Galatians chapter 5, 2 Timothy, 2 Thessalonians, the letter of James, the second letter of Peter, so on and so forth. That's divine positive law. Does it have any basis in civil law? I would say that it does. I stand in opposition to this motion.
I mean, either I'm making fun of the religious people or I'm making fun of the gay people. I can't be doing both, can I?
Make fun of people.
All right.
Wonder
well,
why you,
I
wonder
apologize
why
to the
why
two
don't you
gay
make
people
fun
in
of,
Wyoming.
Oh, come on, pal. That's just bullshit. And I don't have to come on this program. I don't have to come on this program when Matthew Shepard was killed in this state and the people of this state were offended. So put that one in your pipe.
You know what? Excuse me, but I have been a much bigger defender of gay rights than anybody in the state of Wyoming.
So have I, pal.
We are talking with Gregory Hinton, gay author and filmmaker involved in the project we're about to discuss, who was born in Wolf Point, Montana. So what brings you back to Montana now?
The mission of Out West is to shine a light on the positive contributions of our community to the history and culture of the American West, and that's what brings me to Montana.
Why the focus on the rural West?
I want Out West to celebrate those who have remained in Montana, have not sought life elsewhere in the big city. I've met a number of wonderful folks in the last several weeks, many with terrific stories, and they have a lot to give and a lot to teach those of us who are living in the cities. That's me. And then if you want to cut it off, we'll just go to the next picture. I have had an extraordinary couple of years since I last spoke here at the BBHC. A month after I returned to LA, I found myself standing at another lectern in the Western Film Gallery of the Autry National Center, in another very beautiful Western art museum. I was there to commemorate the installation of the iconic intertwined shirts worn by Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal in Brokeback Mountain. They kicked Kevin Costner and Dances with Wolves out to make room for them. That was a joke. So before coming to Wyoming, I had arranged for this display because I noticed that my community was nowhere to be found in any Western American art museum or research library in all the consortiums of museums west. And so I wondered what artifact would be best to put in the Autry Film Gallery. And the Brokeback mountain shirts came to mind. So I looked them up online, and I discovered that they had been sold at charity auction for $100,000. You can move to the next one. I located the owner just on a generic website address. His name's Tom Gregory. He's a Hollywood memorabilia collector and very generous. And he called me right away and said, you know, I bought those shirts 3 years ago, and I expected museums to call me all over the world, and you're the only one who has. So let's make this work. 6 months later, and this is how nimble the Autry was, the shirts were put on display in the Autry Film Gallery, and the ceremony was attended by the Autry trustees, the staff, the Western scholars and artists, and hosted specifically by Mrs. Jean Autry herself. And also attending were 25 members of the International Gay Rodeo Association. You can do the next thing. And for those of you who don't know, there is a Gay Rodeo Association. It's been around for 35 years. There are 5,000 members, and they have 26 member associations all over the United States and Canada. And a week after the installation of the shirts, the IGRA archives, which include rodeo posters, programs, rule books, belt buckles, records, were picked up from the basement of a Denver Western gay bar and driven across the Rockies to Los Angeles, where they're now in the permanent rodeo collection of the Autry Library. They're now being processed with part of a $100,000 grant that they got from the National Archives. And for my efforts toward gay Western history, I was named Honorary Grand Marshal 2010 of World Gay Rodeo in Laughlin, Nevada. So I told them I'm not so good on a horse, and so they put me in the back of a truck. I fell off the truck during grand entry. Enormous community goodwill has came from that Autry event, and it generated national media attention. Conan O'Brien even made fun of us, which we regarded as a win. So the Autry thought this was pretty great, and they asked me to develop a program series to take on the road. So the first year, 2009, we did 1 program. The second year, we did 5. And this year, we've done 12 programs in 5 different states. And I partner with museums, libraries, and universities. And Dan Finley, President and CEO of the Autry National Center, sends a message today. He says, "Greetings from the Autry National Center in Los Angeles. We're pleased to share the Out West program with the people of Cody and look forward to more of these important collaborations." And this brings me back to the results of my energies here. By studying the collection, interviewing your wonderfully knowledgeable curators and educators, and reading the Buffalo Bill papers, I feel that I've accomplished my initial objective, which is stated in my abstract, was to analyze the assets of the BBHC for evidence of LGBT history and culture in the American West. And I'm taking home with me tomorrow something much more substantive, a greater understanding of the generous charisma of William F. Cody and why people love him so. And I must say, stand back, Louisa. I admit, too, I must now confess as having an innocent crush on Buffalo Bill. If you want to go to the next. 3 months before the Wild West came to Paris, the celebrated 19th century French painter Rosa Borr was grieving the death of her companion of 50 years, Natalie Mekas. Bonnier's reputation as internationally acclaimed animalier was well known, primarily as a result of her mammoth painting Horse Fair, depicting an auction of Percheron horses, which Cornelius Vanderbilt subsequently purchased for $55,000 and donated it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I should say that Gertrude Vanderbilt, his daughter, was only 12 at the time, and I imagine she was there for the installation of that painting, and I'm sure it registered when she was invited by Mr. Coe at the suggestion of Carolyn Lockhart to do the statue of Buffalo Bill, because she studied everything there was to know about Buffalo Bill. So Horse Fair was reproduced in lithographs all over the world, and certainly Colonel Cody would have known about it and admired her for it. So Rosa Borr came from simple roots. Her father was a painter, her mother was a musician, which informed the artistic abilities of Rosa and her siblings. Her mother died early on and her father remarried. Rosa's talent blossomed quickly, and her reputation as an eccentric who dressed in women's clothing was also well known. She excused her need for masculine attire, she's not dressed that way here obviously, as necessary to work in slaughterhouses and stockyards. She applied and received an official permit from the French government to dress like a man, renewable every 6 months as long as she didn't appear that way in public. So all of you would have to be applying for these permits if things were the same. She and Natalie were inseparable since Rosa was 14. They were so close that on his deathbed, Natalie's father begged them to never ever part. So Natalie ran the house. She managed their business affairs and served as the studio assistant. She often laid on underpaintings and traced sketches onto canvas. She was naturally tragic, and she gave off airs which amused the dowdy and humble Bonheur. They traveled together, and when she died, Bonheur grieved deeply, and she found life unendurable, and she wrote to a friend, "You can very well understand how hard it is to be separated from a friend like my Natalie, whom I loved more and more as we advanced in life. For she had borne with me the mortifications and stupidities inflicted on us by the silly, ignorant, low-minded people." This is a line that gets me. "She alone knew me, and I, her only friend, knew what she was worth." So 3 months after Natalie's death, Rosa Bonheur's art dealer arranged for her to visit Buffalo Bill's Wild West at the Paris Exposition Nationale. In addition to finding a great new friend in Cody, she also found herself as the artist in residence behind the scenes of the Wild West. And I was curious to see if she commented about the death of Natalie in those circumstances, and she did. She freely roamed the premises and said she was especially interested in the Indians. She said, "Observing them at close range really refreshed my sad old mind. I was free to work among the Redskins, drawing and painting them with their horses, weapons, camps, and animals. Buffalo Bill was extremely good to me." And to pay him back, she invited him to her castle at B at the edge of Fontainebleau and offered to paint his portrait for free. This was unheard of because she rarely did equestrian paintings, and at the time her paintings sold for 300,000 francs. When it was finished, Cody sent it to North Platte, where a year later his house caught fire. And when he heard about it, he wired his sister Julia and said, "Save the Bonheur and let the house go to blazes." So how about the next shot? Over the years, this image was incorporated into countless posters and programs, including the famous one where Bonheur is seated between her paintings of Cody and Napoleon, which served to elevate Cody to the stature of a great general. Lithographs were made and copies were made after her death by artist Robert Lemieux. In 1896, Cody put 200 Percheron and Norman horses into his arena as a living tableau to horse fair. So he and Bonheur must have really adored each other. 3 days after she invited Bonheur to Cody to lunch at B, a businessman named Arbuckle paid a visit accompanied by Anna Chlumsky, who was an American artist who offered to act as translator between them. Well, several years before, Arbuckle a devoted fan of her work, had sent 2 wild Mustangs from his Wyoming ranch. And he came to Paris to see them in her stable. She was forced to admit that when Cody had arrived, she had complained how wild they were. He had 2 cowboys break them, and she gave them to him for his Wild West show. So the guy came to see his horses, and they were already in the show. But that was okay. The significant part of this is that Arbuckle left, but Anna Chlumsky, whose work Bonheur admired, quickly found herself ensconced in B. So when Bonheur died 10 years later, her entire fortune, which was sizable, was left to Chlumsky, to the exclusion of her family, who had long resented her long relationship with Natalie Meekus. So Chlumsky wisely and generously agreed just to split halvies with them, and went on to a great career of her own. So if Rosa Bonheur's fame saved her love life, you can go on to the next image, the same can't be said of Oscar Wilde, who was also a fan and a friend of Buffalo Bill. 5 years before Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, Wilde came to America to lecture on aestheticism and the decorative arts. His fame as the Oxford articulated effete intellectual allowed him to book nearly 150 engagements from New York to Leadville, a high point of his tour, where H.A.W. Tabor named a mine shaft the Oscar in his honor and dropped him by bucket deep into the mine. Wilde apparently hoped that they might include shares in the mine with the honor, but to their great surprise and delight, he lit a cigar and drank all their whiskey and was pronounced a bully boy with no glass eye. It's speculated that Wilde's success in America may have prompted Buffalo Bill's Wild West to return the favor in England. We were trading talent across the seas, and both countries were very interested and supported it. So you could do the next. On his impending visit, Wilde wrote of the American invasion and that English people were far more interested in American barbarism than they are in American civilization. The cities of America are inexpressibly tedious. Better the far west with its grizzly bears and its untamed cowboys, its free open air and its free open air manners, its boundless prairie and its boundless mendacity. This is what Buffalo Bill is going to bring to London, and we have no doubt that London will fully appreciate the show, which, as we know, is history. So in 1887, when the Wild West hit London, Oscar Wilde had been married for 3 years. He quickly had 2 sons in a row. His wife, Constance, was attractive, intelligent, and fully unprepared for life as Mrs. Oscar Wilde. He spared no expense with his friends, a lot like Buffalo Bill, but many of them were single, attractive young men, unlike Buffalo Bill, and left her to childcare while he socialized in London. His friends were remarkable, Henry James and James Whistler, and while in America he paid a call to Walt Whitman, who, according to biographer Richard Ellman, openly discussed his homosexuality with Wilde. So Constance was not his first choice as a wife. His first proposal went to a lady named Frances Balcom, who married Bram Stoker, at the time the manager of the Lyceum Theatre, instead. Frances didn't have it much better than Constance Wilde. Stoker, who ultimately wrote Dracula, was deeply obsessed with his boss, the eminent Victorian actor Henry Irving, who befriended Cody before he came to London. It was on Irving's arm that Buffalo Bill came to know the British royals, and if Cody enhanced the underwhelming physicality of Irving raised Cody's credibility mightily above the stature of circus master, which they were not wanting to have evolve. It is suggested that Stoker was actually jealous of Cody, though it was clear that they had direct dealings and invitations for Cody by British nobility. And this was, if you ever get a chance to read the invitation book of Cody's or the scrapbook, the invitations from people like the Prince of Wales, I mean, he just must have been so terribly, terribly busy. So they avalanched onto him so much, if you could do the next, that a personal note from Constance implies that Wilde, too, had to possibly compete for his audience. It says, Dear Colonel Cody, we so hope that you'll be able to come and have tea with us on Wednesday. We should be so disappointed not to see you. Yours sincerely, Constance Wilde. And this was at their rented home on 16th Tite Street, which was the major private address in London at the time. So even Oscar Wilde had this really fantastically flamboyant mother who was a writer and an impresario, and she. It's also in the papers. She sent her note to Wilde, asking him, offering him a standing invitation to her salon. And when she moved to London, she was struggling financially and couldn't afford help, so she apparently kept all of her drapes drawn during the daylight and lit her rooms in red candlelight so no one would see the dust. So she's cool, so they need to do something about her. But with this information, I've connected with the Wilde Society and also the British Library, and what I haven't been able to find is just a substantive conversation between them reported. And since there were cameras for the Wild West in London, there must have been cameras somewhere with Wilde and Cody, and I think that would really be great to start looking for and piece this relationship together. So both of them in 1897, Wilde was yet to write his plays Lady Windermere's Fan and The Importance of Being Earnest, and his only novel The Picture of Dorian Gray. And Cody aware of Rosa Borr's reputation certainly would have known probably about Oscar Wilde's. And Wilde's downfall would start to occur in 1992 when he became seriously involved with Lord Alfred Douglas, who was the son of the Marquess of Queensberry, who did the Queensberry rules. Queensberry was violently antagonistic toward this relationship and publicly accused Wilde of sodomy. And Wilde, which was the ruin of his life, foolishly sued him for libel and lost. So it would be very interesting also to know of Cody's reaction to Wilde's notorious trial and his subsequent conviction in 1895. Cody had yet to face his own trial of public opinion with Julia, but Wilde was sentenced to 2 years hard labor in one of the worst prisons in England. And all the while he just assumed that his fame would rescue him. His friends turned their backs on him. His wife, who remained loyal to him, had to change her name, and by 1899, Oscar Wilde, Constance, Lady Wilde, and his brother Willie were all dead, and Oscar Wilde died at 46, and he's one of the greatest talents that we've ever known. So Wilde made homosexuality infamous, and it's important to consider this word because at the time of Wilde's death, the word homosexual had only been used in a German scientific journal. It wasn't ever even in the public vernacular until 1910. So as scholars and historians and just generally people are interested, what are you if you don't have a name to be called? And how is your quality of life? It's very, very interesting how that word homosexual changed everything, and Oscar Wilde was the poster boy for that. In 19th century America, and this was something I really wasn't understanding, same-sex friends of all ages held hands while walking down the streets of cities and towns. Few people regarded it as remarkable when same-sex friends kissed each other full on the lips in public or private. Fewer still saw anything unusual in the common American practice of same-sex friends sharing the same bed, sometimes for years at a time. Whether in privileged society and working-class culture, letters between same-sex friends had emotional intensity and passionate references. You all remember Eleanor Roosevelt was thought to have been lesbian because of her letters to her dear friend Lorena Hickok, and I hope that's the right name. And they were love letters, but they were love letters between friends. So these are manifestations of what D. Michael Quinn, the author of Same-Sex Dynamics among 19th century Americans, a Mormon example, is called the homocultural orientation of 19th century Americans. And it was very confusing, and it's very confusing for scholars now, because we can't impose our 21st century values on what we see in the past. There wasn't, gay liberation basically is 35 years old. I should say 41, starting with Stonewall. But a lot of the major strides were made in 1975, and then AIDS knocked it back. So this is like, you know, when I came out in 1975, I expected so much. I mean, I was so naive because I just assumed because I could go to a gay bar, everything was going to just fall into place without getting, you know, injured. So this is we're not very long in this conversation. And 2010 was such an important year for my community. And this is how I came to know Al. I wrote him when Prop 8 failed or passed in California, and I wrote responding to this very video on Bill Maher, and you know, you write an important personal letter and then you go, oh my God, what have I done? You know, how ridiculous, whatever. So, a month or two later, in comes this letter, you know, Senator Al Simpson, and I go, oh wow. So I read it, and it's just among my proudest possessions, because I told him about my family and my brother and my dad, who I remembered, and it just it's absolutely part of the reason that I'm standing here today was his courtesy to me, and Ann's as well. I was kind of like the guests that wouldn't leave. I dropped them a line every now and then. And it must be very challenging. And I thank Ann Pendley also, because she's been great. But this Al made me realize that we should be able to go anywhere that we want to go. And I had this concern that I wouldn't be welcome in Wyoming. And several years ago, I got a residency at UCross Foundation. And I had friends, my doctor, who's a gay man who had a partner who came to Cody, who liked it so much that he named his dog Cody, said, "You can't go to Wyoming alone. They'll kill you." And that's the unfair, unfortunate reputation of the state. And I'm hoping that with Out West that we can change that. It's a habit of an opinion. You know, we have these, we develop habits that aren't even necessarily informed by deep feeling anymore. It's just a habit, an automatic reaction, and that's what we're hoping to do. So, let's see. So I've stated that my generation of gay men and women evacuated the rural western communities and hightailed it to urban centers as quickly as we could. But what it seems to me, and what I've been looking at in 19th century America, the opposite might have been true, particularly for the effete sons of wealthy eastern families who were sent west for their health or their nerves. When Owen Wister's The Virginian was criticized for the unrealistic language of its cowboys, one old-timer remarked, "Well, maybe we didn't talk that way before Mr. Wister wrote his book, but we sure all talked that way after the book was published." So if they had unsavory words for same-gender devotion in the scholarly terms, the scholarly terms, as a scholar or someone interested in this history, you look for the word invert. And there's a lot of discussion of effeminacy. And if Rosa Borr was hounded for not marrying, this is a quote, "Male artists and clergymen and teachers were viewed at the same time as effeminate because their careers involved nurture and sentiment and understanding of human feeling used to cultivate and ennoble the human spirit." And this is from a very wonderful book I discovered, which is upstairs in the gallery by Lisa Strong, called Sentimental Journey, The Art of Alfred Jacob Miller. If you want to go. Now, not only was Miller's masculinity threatened by virtue of profession, he also failed on a more serious score, which was he was not married. He was a bachelor. And a bachelor in those times was deemed socially arrested. Male authors found themselves at odds with masculine norms and consequently sought to subvert middle-class standards of masculinity in their writing. Longfellow complained about the reputation of male writers in a letter to Walt Whitman. Americans hold the appellation of the scholar and man of letters in as little repute as did our Gothic ancestors of Roman, associating with about the same idea of effeminacy and inefficiency. They think that learning of books is not wisdom, that study unfits a man for action, that poetry and nonsense are convertible terms, that literature begets an effeminate and craven spirit, and in a word, that the dust and cobwebs of a history are a kind of an armor, which will not stand against the hard knocks of the bone and muscle of the state and the huge two-fisted sway of the stunning stump orator. We have many of those today. When Borr was asked why she never married, she implied that her work made it impossible. Lisa Strong reports that this sentiment was echoed by Alfred Jacob Miller, who pasted the following quote to the inside cover of his journal. Michelangelo, the painter, was asked why he did not marry, and he replied, "I've espoused my art, and it occasions me sufficient domestic cares, for my work shall be my children." She goes on to say of Miller that his biography suggests there may have been circumstantial or psychological explanations for his bachelorhood, but what is significant for this argument is that Miller himself presented it as a professional choice. Now, Alfred Jacob Miller was the son of a well-to-do Baltimore businessman who quickly recognized his son's talent. He was offered the chance to study wherever he wanted, so he chose Paris over London. He's a funny guy. When you read about him, he's really rather posh. I mean, he wanted to stay in the best places, and his dad was actually a grocer. It's not like he came from a first class. His dad was a wealthy working man, but he wanted to eat well and he wanted to stay well, and so he studied and excelled, and he was excellent. And so looking at him, and again, in terms of what I'm trying to determine, is who did he pal around with? So he traveled with a guy named N. Parker Willis, who is a well-known poet. And so I look him up, and there's his sister calling him effeminate in papers. So this word just was like a bullet to these talented, artistic men, some who might have been gay, some who might not have been gay. I certainly don't know about Miller, but he's interesting to look at. He returned to Baltimore after London, and his father died suddenly, and he realized that he was loaded with debt, and he had to go to New Orleans with $10 in his pocket. So it was in New Orleans that he met Scottish explorer William Drummond Stewart, who commissioned Miller to accompany him to Wyoming to record the annual Trappers' Rendezvous. And it's astonishing if you think about, you can hit the next image, if you think about his oeuvre, that Miller only spent 6 months in the West, and by what you seem to read about it, if Stewart had asked him to go to Morocco, that would have been fine too. It was just, it was a fabulous painting holiday. So it has been suggested by some scholars that Stewart may have had same-sex orientations, but Miller is curious because his personal life is completely unknown. When he finished his commissioned Western sojourn, he returned to New Orleans until he accepted Stewart's invitation to come to Merthley Castle in Scotland to paint, and Jeremy's studied this. Stewart had unhappily become the Lord of Merthley upon the death of his brother, and this was a responsibility he absolutely loathed. He had been forced to marry a girl that he had impregnated, a farm girl apparently, who's regarded as lovely, but he just wanted to take off as soon as he could. So he leaves Miller ensconced at Merthley, and in Miller's words he writes, "I have a delicious little painting room which looks out onto a garden." So acting as Stewart's valet was Antoine Clement, who had been Stewart's scout, who had taken them all through the West. And so Miller was left taking a head seat at the table and entertained and had generally a good time. And he completed his work, and when Stewart left, he was financially well set to come back to Baltimore and buy a beautiful farm. And his 4 unmarried sisters all moved in with him. So of about 6 or 7 siblings, I think 5 were unmarried, and 1 brother who was kind of a financial type managed Miller's money, and so he had no financial reasons not to marry. There was no hang-up about money, and he could work and all of this, but he preferred his friends as his patrons, and he lived a very quiet life till we're talking about him now. But Miller was a romantic painter, and he and Stewart, in the commission of the work, because Stewart was involved a lot in his choices of what to paint. I mean, Stewart wanted what he wanted. But they didn't have any intention of making maps or engraving flora and fauna or any need to convince anyone to settle in the West or to choose a site for a railroad. They wanted to paint a romantic image of the West, and Miller often imbued meditative, very idle qualities to his trappers. That is, when he wasn't painting Indians in battle, and he perhaps leaned on their ruggedness to bolster his lack of it. But you could go to the next image. George Catlin was a contemporary painter of Miller, and he was also much admired by Rosa Borr for his North American Indian portfolio. But Catlin can be credited for something remarkably and anthropologically rare, and this is his painting Dance of the Berdache. And why this is so valuable to me is, does anybody know what the Berdache phenomenon was? Well, I looked it up. I found a great a cassette here, a recording of a historian named Benton Lanford, and I was so happy for the fact that he presented a paper called Historic Arts of the Berdache and Two-Spirited People at the 1996 Plains Indian Seminar here at the BBHC. So I'm not the first one here, which is really great. And Berdache is a bit of a complicated term, but it means of man and of woman, and I guess we would say it could be transgender, but it was more than that. Berdache were known for their gifts of artistry and mediation. Many tribes did not impose change on their young children. They just they tested them and they let them be, and they grew up with great gifts. And what this teaches us in this day and age is that if we really let people evolve, take them where their hearts want to go without imposing unnecessary and inefficient change on them, that it's a great thing to learn. And this is why, frankly, a lot of, not my words, a lot of white gay scholars really looked into this issue very heavily in the 1980s, and it's caused a bit of, well, quite a bit of controversy. Because not all of the Berdache were treated so well. But the study of the, so Berdachism has been described as a mixing of genders and loosely described as transgender, but because the term derives from the Arabic berdaz, which means male concubine or prostitute, it's now considered a derogatory term. So native terms like the Navajo call their two spirits Nutle or the crow Bote. Those are preferable, or generally the term two-spirit has become acceptable. What I love is that you all may have heard of General Hugh Lennox Scott, who was also a friend of Buffalo Bill's. And he was, when he was a West Point graduate, he arrived post-Custer and he found himself responsible for developing a working relationship with once self-sufficient tribes who are now dependent on the Army as wards of the government. You can go to the next image. So this is Scott with Buffalo Bill looking remarkably like Teddy Roosevelt. Mary assures me that he's not, but as a young man, he had noticed two spirits as he traveled around the West, and he was genuinely interested in learning all aspects that he could about Native America and culture. And so he visited the Buffalo Skin Lodge of Iron Bull and noticed how beautifully crafted it was. He went on and on about how comfortable it was, and they invited him to stay. And so 40 years later, as a retired general, he returned to the Crow Agency and was told that the woman who had made it lived there. And this was Oshtish, or her other name was Finds Them and Kills Them, and she was two-spirit. She was a man dressed as a woman. And he took it upon himself to interview her in detail and record everything that she said and explained to him about who she was and who they were. And another thing she learned, that it was recorded that two women fought in the Battle of Rosebud with the Crow and General Crook, and Oshtish was one of them. So in addition to being an artisan and a medicine person, she was also a warrior. And in a terrific book by a friend of mine, Will Roscoe, called Changing Ones, he kind of does an excerpt of the interview by Scott of Oshtish. And he says, Scott asked her why she wore woman's clothes, and she said, "That is my road." How long has she acted like a woman? And she said, since birth she was inclined to be a woman. So Lanford Benton reported that Oshtish was an artist, a medicine woman, and a warrior, that she made other beautiful lodges, and she was responsible for all the large trees around the Crow Agency. And a lodge that she sold when she was older is still possibly being exhibited at the Crow Fair, so really great to bring it here, I don't know. So Oshtish endured many attempts to change his road. In the advent of the two-spirit communities, well, this is what's great, is there are now active two-spirit communities in Montana and Colorado. They meet for long weekends once a year, and so Oshtish's struggle was not in vain. You can do the next image. Oh, I'm sorry, that was Oshtish. She's on the left. And there are a number of photographs of her, but you can go to the next image. One of the programs that we offer with my Out West series is Two Spirits, and some of you may have heard about this on the PBS Independent Lens last year. We presented this in West Hollywood. It's done by my friend Lydia Nibley, and maybe you can't read it, but it said Fred Martinez was a Navajo boy who was also a girl. In an earlier era, he would have been revered, but instead he was murdered. So in 2003, he was murdered on his reservation at Four Corners, Cortez, Colorado, and this is a film. It's a very, very beautiful film. You can go online and find it, but it does a great job of describing exactly what a two-spirit is and the Navajo culture and the broader culture of how two spirits fit into contemporary society. It's a very moving and beautiful film. So it's got to be assumed that Colonel Cody had encountered two-spirit women and men, because it went the other way, and heard of them through his friendship with General Scott. So in any case, cross-dressing was very common on the Western frontier, and it certainly would not have given him pause. So he was Will to his mother, sister Julia, Buffalo Bill to his ardent fans, Colonel to his promoters, Pahaska to the Indians, and William F. Cody was a scout, a Pony Express rider, an Indian fighter, an entrepreneur. He was a best friend, an easy touch, a doting father, a disappointing husband, a devoted brother, a bad actor, and he was a consummate showman. He staunchly believed in equal rights for women. He was an abolitionist, a conservationist, and supported fair treatment by the government for Indians. He was handsome, he was generous, he was charismatic, athletic, and sensual. He was described as being a magnificent centaur with a tender heart, unafraid to weep real tears or hold the hand of a friend by fire. In a remarkable article in Outdoor Life, a magazine of the West called In the Heart of the Rockies with Cody, writer Irving R. Bacon, reporting on a 1903 never-to-be-forgotten trip on the headwaters of the Yellowstone with Buffalo Bill, apparently interrupted Cody and White Beaver, his best friend since childhood, in a moment of intimacy by a roaring fire. Quietly arising, I peeped through the cabin door and saw a sight never to be forgotten. There sat the two men clasping each other's hands and within their hearts, ratifying the brotherhood beginning 40 years ago. Long association with Western men has taught me that nearly all of them are tender-hearted, and I see them in the glow of the firelight. Cody, suddenly arising and slapping Powell on the shoulder, said, "This artist will think we're growing sentimental in our old age, Frank." "I guess the young man understands us pretty well, Will," replied the doctor. "Undoubtedly, he is still having his daydreams and will not begrudge us hours of the evening." And a photo clutching the hand of Powell is contained in this article. I don't have that photo here to show you, but it's there. So my question being, my life informs me, and so my question is, was William F. Cody accepting of what I like to call the rarity he discovered in Rosa Borr or Oscar Wilde? Did he meet men or women with same gender desire in his travels, and how would he have reacted to them? As Paul Fees told me, he was as unprejudiced as any man could possibly be. And as John Rum has thoughtfully observed, Cody suffered as a boy for the loss of a young father, and he was tortured at the loss of as the father of a young son. He loved his friends and engendered great love and absolute loyalty in return. If you want to hit the next image. So why is it important for my community to have a history to look back on, especially here in the American West? I found the answer beautifully articulated in a book by David Deitcher called Dear Friends. In it, Deitcher writes, "Being drawn in this way to enigmatic artifacts from the past provides evidence of longing. Longing for self-evaluation that results from having a history to refer to. Longing for a comforting sense of connection to others, past as well as present, whose experience mirrors one's own." In my play, Beyond Brokeback, which is culled from a collection of essays, poetry, and songs that were posted to a website formed in the aftermath of the film, they received over 500,000 posts in the first year. And one of the most poignant messages to me is this one. A lot of people, myself included, have been confused and a little freaked out by their strong emotional reactions to Brokeback Mountain. Some have said it felt like Brokeback Mountain uncovered a well of sadness in them that they didn't know existed, which also applies to me. What didn't make sense to me was why people with seemingly little in common, male or female, straight or gay, happily married or divorced, single or partnered, all ended up the same way, sobbing as if their hearts would break. I think each of us who's had this reaction has experienced severe emotional wounding that, up until now, has never been healed by grieving. I also think that the reason we had not grieved up until now is that the wounding, even though sincere, was a slow process, so slow that many of us didn't even know we'd been hurt until we saw the slow, indisputable proof laid out before us on the screen, and realized that to varying degrees, it was the story of our own wounding being told. To those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. And I ask, without memory, how can we know what to dream? My goal for Out West is to staunch the flow of my tribe from its rural Western communities, and that rural Western towns cherish their gay children. The city is not for everyone. When we leave our families and communities, they're the worse off for not knowing us, and we them. Annie Prue wrote me a note when she heard of my mission for Out West. She wrote, "I wish Mr. Hinton good fortune in his work. He's tragically right when he says Western rural communities lose very much when gay men and women leave the state. I know some gay people who have stayed. Gradually the community accepts them, but only if they're born there." So I recently returned to Wyoming with the ashes of my beloved older brother Scotty and those of Ron, who was his partner of 30 years. Before he died, my brother requested that they be scattered in Crazy Woman Creek in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains. So after life in urban Southern California, my Western brother yearned for his rural past till the end. For those of us who come from the West, it's in our blood and it never lets us go. But how do we move on from this slow wounding we've now realized? What needs to change in society before Jack Twist's dream of him and Ennis owning a ranch together would be a non-event in a rural community? Brokeback Mountain taught us what not to do. You can hit the next slide. So how do we get beyond Brokeback? Companionship, community, and safety can all be achieved right here in rural America. The truth is, cities are really no safer. Visibility is key. Respect for differences is vital on both sides. Celebrating our culture joyfully is a must. And understanding and claiming and recording our history is a great start. Since Out West began, I've had the privilege of meeting artists, writers, and Western scholars and historians who I'm introducing in programs all around the country. Books inspired by Out West include William Handley's The Brokeback Book and Patricia Nell Warren's My West, and they're now, I'm happy to say, in the McCracken Library. I recently discovered a cache of photos in the One Archives in Los Angeles, taken in 1988 to 1990 when gay rodeo was at its peak, but AIDS was hitting the community hard. And I'd like to share these with you. Some were friends and some have left us. These images were shot by Blake Little, who became a champion bull rider. Because my dad was a rodeo photographer, I became interested in the work of other equestrian photographers, including Louise L. Serpa and especially Kurt Marcus, who I saw exhibited in the McCracken Library last year. So it was my goal to analyze the collection of BBHC for proof of my culture here in Wyoming's American West. And I thank all of you because I've made great headway. Any ideas and insights that come to you, please get in touch with me. Now, for my mother, museums were just about as high as you could go. Some people are intimidated by museums, but because I grew up with such a great one down the street, that's never been my problem. When we visited cousins in their small Minnesota town, I remember asking where their museum was. So museums offer us many things to take away with us. It is also our duty to give back to them, and I'm proud to say that the Idle Museum will be exhibiting Blake's collection next year as part of their Out West programming. Of interest, James Nottage, who you may know of, who's the senior curator at the Idle Jorg, used to work at the Autry. And what got me started with this is he had left a small folder on gay rodeo from 1987 in the files, and I found that, and that caused me to imagine that the Gay Rodeo Archives must be someplace else. So it's going to be really great to go there and finally meet him. I know that he's held in very high esteem. And now, if we can click off, I'd just like to show you a slideshow of Blake's rodeo pictures, and we can talk through it, or if you have questions, that would be great. I think you go up there. Just, oh, there we go. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Let me see if I can find it. Told me how to do this, but rats.
That's the document folder there. Is that it, Gregory?
Could be. Oh.
I think if we did view show or... Oh, we go back to what...
He showed it to me. It's
Is it on this computer?
Yeah, definitely. I saw it.
Is it in our pictures?
Sorry, where's pictures?
Right down here.
No.
Documents.
Nope. Well, I don't know what to do here.
What would it be titled under?
It's Blake's photos. I have, it's on the disc, if we can go to the disc.
Okay. Oh, it's on this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Get it? There it is. There we go.
Yeah, Blake photos up there.
All right.
Sorry, everyone. If you want to do it on a slideshow, we can do that.
We good?
Yeah. Can we set it on a slideshow?
Oh.
Middle button.
Where's Mac?
Middle button. Middle button. Aha, there it is.
So, like I say, these were taken in 1988 to 1990, and these are of some of them are from Gay Rodeo in Colorado. And I just kind of like you to look at them and see if you think they're that much different than mainstream rodeo.
No, they all look crazy to me.
This is my friend Randy. He passed away many years ago. But you can see why they reminded me of Kurt Marcus. We've now formed something called the Gay and Lesbian Rodeo Heritage Foundation, and they put that together when the archives went to the Autry, so it's a nonprofit. So I'm on the board of that as well. As I say, for a non-writer, it interests me a lot.
Who is this photographer?
His name is Blake Little, and he's this is an image. This is such a great image. Pardon me for saying so, but it's so gay. And that's Blake. That's my friend Jim Wilkie. He worked as a curator at the Autry. Out front was the first gay publication produced by my friend Phil Barlow, and he passed away also.
That's a great photo.
Before last year, before Don't Ask, Don't Tell got overturned, a lot of people in the military were also in rodeo, and they always had to work under pseudonyms. So now they don't have to anymore. And gay rodeo allows women to compete in every event. This is kind of embarrassing because I go to Bozeman and I was talking about the Autry and everything, and a woman raised her hand and she said, "Did you know that when Gene Autry bought all those rodeos in the 30s, that the first thing he outlawed was women was women doing all the events?" And I said, "Well, Jackie Autry has corrected all of that," and they were happy with that. But we can, does anybody have any questions, or, because these will go on for a bit.
Spell Burdash.
It's Berdache.
What was one depicted in, was it Little Big Man, or?
That's an excellent point, because that was referenced in the talk here, that there was a Burdache represented in Little Big Man. It wasn't a flattering representation.
It
but
wasn't?
apparently. Apparently that's not how he interpreted it, but. So it's just wild if you think about it. I was so proud of my dad's photo. So I started looking at rodeo photos, and I just think these are so beautiful. And what was fun is Blake had put these away. He's a photographer, a professional photographer, and I called him, and he pulled these out of his. He said, "I forgot I even had them because I found them in a magazine." I said, "What are you doing with those photos?" He'd photographed me years ago, and he said, "Well, I haven't even looked at those. What do you want them for? Look how great they are."
Greg, when you started working with the Autry on the programming here, was there much of a reaction from the Autry community, the members and things? Were there protests or people canceling their memberships or things saying this should not be a part of the history?
They had to be very concerned about this because this was kind of so new. And another generosity of Al was I emailed him one of my weekly messages to him, and he wrote me a quote because I knew that Mrs. Autry would be present, and I knew that the president of the Board of Trustees would be there, and I calculated that Al's reassurance would be helpful, and it was. So they did give it a lot of thought, and the LA Times in particular was really trying to find, frankly, some dirt on it, like was I, how was I being treated? Were they paying enough for it? And were any trustees giving them grief? And one trustee, it had been quoted to me, had said, "I just don't want us to all be betrayed like bigots like Randy Quaid was in Brokeback Mountain." And that was, quote, it was a concern of his. He just didn't want it, and as I was on guard for any kind of bias, what I need to now really be on guard is my own bias where I go. That for me to assume that Wyoming is a dangerous place or that the BBHC wouldn't want to do this programming, to just to react hostily if I get a turn down, and I don't do that. But this was an interesting thing. I got to meet Judy Shepard, and I said, I explained I was from Cody, and she thought that was interesting. And I said, I have experienced bias as a gay man, but in an urban situation, I've also experienced as a rural-born man. That if you're not from LA or San Francisco or New York, then you're not equal. And that was something that I felt quite often. And she laughed and she said, well, that's they just don't know what they're talking about, obviously. But so what my goal also, Allen Ginsberg made this quote. He said, I'm not here to promote homosexuality. I'm here to promote frankness. And Oscar Wilde also wrote in one of his plays, it is so exhausting not to talk. And so what I hope with Out West is that people who don't consider coming to Western art museums would reconsider it. And it's not like, the Autry, as I say, has reported that fundraising opportunities have opened up to them and media opportunities have opened up to them because they can go places that wouldn't have considered them before. But this is a bias not even so much against what would be a conservative position. It's also, there's a great bias about representational Western art. And it's in our community now, that'd be great. In our community now, Mindy Bisau wrote something really wonderful for the opening of the Whitney. She said, you're not going to come, and I love contemporary modern art, but she said, you're not going to come into our museum and see a white painting with a red dot on it. You're going to see something that you can walk outside and see again. And in these times, that is very, very comforting. And I thought that was just such a great thing. Because, I started going to the Autry because I was so homesick. And they at the time, they just, I was telling Jeremy, I think that, or Bruce maybe, that I had, here I'm doing a paper on Buffalo Bill, and the Autry's taken down their Buffalo Bill exhibit now. And I come to the BBHC, and that's all like on shelves. So now I'm mad to go find the Rosa Borr, posters and all of that, and we should see what they're doing with theirs. But I really appreciate your support here. This is I came here to give you 100% of myself, and I hope I've done that. But I have to tell you that this fellowship, I got letters of congratulations from very, very important people, and I just think that it's great that Cody's on the map, and it's really fun to know Al after he's gotten famous. So, I'm teasing you, but I just
Did you ever read the Cody statement?
I
did here in this museum in the basement with the gay lesbian community, and went all over the community and all over the world. It was about the right to be left alone, the precious, things we treasure in the West, the right of privacy, all those things, and the code of the West. We threw it all in there. Charles Francis helped draft that, and the man from California who ran for the Senate, remember, he was
Michael Huffington,
and another gentleman, and that baby went all
Jeremy has it on his desk.
Together with the letter I wrote to Reverend Phelps, which said, "Dear Reverend Phelps, some busy son of a bitch is writing me letters and using your name." And I know you wouldn't want that because you're a great Christian leader of the world. It was a beautiful letter. I never heard much from him. But there were people in this community when I was a kid. Dr. Lane, the famous Dr. Lane, and Marjorie Ross were inseparable. Slept in the same bed. That was not uncommon in the 1920s and 1910. There were other couples I won't mention because one of them has a son that's still here, and they lived together and did pack trips together for 6 months on end.
See, those kind of stories are just so great.
Very common in a sense. And there were guys, that was Cody, Wyoming in the 30s and 40s. So, and Dad and Mom and my grandmother in 1903, it was in Meeteetse, Vermont. Very interesting.
Well, the only person I can say for sure is gay is me here, but again, just to come back and love the rural West is something I share in common with a lot of people, and so this is it's really, really special. So you've given up your lunch hour for me, and we've run over a bit. But Bruce,
what would you say that you would like us as an institution to do? How can we be supportive? How can we further scholarship? What are the things that you might recommend to us?
Well, publicize this event so that people know that you made the gesture. Jeremy called the college in Powell and let them know that they were invited. So just, it isn't that you'll get 10,000 people coming in, but the people who are closeted or their families or something will note the respect, and I think that's really great. So that's one thing. What I'm hoping to do is write a program now called Out West with Buffalo Bill and kind of expand on this and get some more get some more specific information to go with it. But I think that these are beautiful stories, and I think that I tell you quite honestly, to have Gene Autry as a brand was very, very powerful. And I've been interviewed on NPR 5 times. We always get a response, and that Mrs. Autry made that okay. Buffalo Bill as a partner would also be very, very a big deal. And again, I don't want to put you all in a position, or so it's just something to talk about. Publicity is major, and then I hope that you'll continue to do programs with me as they're appropriate for this area. And LA, we have 10 million people, and I know you don't have that many people here, but You have to know that the Laramie, or the Wyoming gay community and the Montana gay community, they travel, they'll come to things. And so not to necessarily have expectation of great numbers, but I'd like to do a Hidden Histories tour of this museum, which we did at the Autry. We thought we'd get 20 people. We had 200 and divided them into 4 groups, and they walked all over the museum to different stations. And we also used the curators and the staff of the museums. Like, I don't do it. It's better if you incorporate the programming into the museum community. And I got letters like you wouldn't have believed. The IT guy wrote me a letter. I think I said, saying, "I'm so proud of the Autry for doing your program. I have a brother who's gay." And so the impact that it had on the Autry community itself was very powerful. So more partnerships, and maybe, you know, if you'd recommend me to the Denver Art Museum, that'd be nice. And I have a joke, and this is where it's unfair of me, but you know, I sent proposals here into the Denver Art Museum, and frankly I thought they'd say yes and you'd say no, and you said yes and they said no. And I really was annoyed, because I used to park next to it when I went to my favorite gay bar, and I kind of figured that I have like I have a right to present my program many years later. But so you've been just, you know, again, just so respectful. And so
I tell you, ever since I became involved in the community, and I take my counsel from them as to how far to go on gay marriage and all the other things, the incremental work is going forward. But what's really interesting is to be in, you know, quote, the high circles, and have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff grab you and say, "My son is gay," and I really appreciate. He said, "I can't do anything now." Or the Assistant Secretary of State saying that the woman who is being in the hearing today is a lesbian, and you need to know that because somebody may bring that up. That's what's interesting. Everybody living has somebody they know or love or related to who is gay or lesbian, and the ones that sometimes lay back and bitch about the queers and all this stuff are people with a gay lesbian family member,
right,
who have rejected that person totally and are pretending that they, you know, hate people like that when down inside they're eating themselves alive.
Yeah.
That's interesting to watch.
It's I once did the math, and it seemed like if, okay, let's say conservatively 5% of the population of the United States is gay or lesbian or transgender, and if each of them had 4 friends who would vote with them, then immediately you've got like close to 50 million people. So it's, you know, I don't know. It's, as I say, this last year has been so important to so many of us in the community. There were the 5 terrible suicides, and that's what drove everybody out. That was as important as Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I mean, it was a year ago, almost exactly, that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was overturned, and that's when my interview was on Brian Kahn's Home Ground show on Yellowstone Public Radio. And I'd like to just say lastly, I did go through a process when I came back here. When I realized I got this fellowship, I felt I needed to come out to people in town that were my friends. I needed to know where I stood, and you know, I called Bruce McCormick, and I called Ernie Goppert, which was like coming out to my dad all over again, and I called, you know, I called Connie and Jay up at the, you know, Thomas the Apostle. I said, there's going to be an interview of me on Yellowstone Public Radio, and I just don't want you to think I deceived you, because I didn't talk about it. And I should tell you, I've lived with the same very wonderful partner for 23 years. I'll tell you this, that marriage is not for us, but we certainly wouldn't stand in the way of anybody else getting married, because it just seems moot to us at this point. And his name is Tom, and he came to visit me last week. We drove up. He'd never been to Yellowstone, and we saw a wolf. And it's just, he's from Brooklyn by way of London and Rome, and I've invited him to come other places like Rio or places more glamorous when I have business there, but the only place he agreed to come was Billings, because he said he'd never been there. So anyway.
Very courageous. And I have worked in the mental health field, having a niece who was mentally ill. And it's the stigma with all things. And I know when I have spoken about mental illnesses in my family, people almost always say, well, I have something to do with it. So
Yeah.
it is important that we all speak out.
Well, I agree, and I just thank you all very, very much.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Gregory, and welcome home.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you very, very much. I'm happy to be here.